My name is Elara Dovell. I'm 28 years old, and it's 2024 here in Halifax, Canada. I never imagined that the last thing my father left me, the Maplewood house I grew up in, would become the battleground of my own family. The place filled with childhood laughter, tears, and my father's promises had been sold behind my back by my own brother. And the worst part, he thought he could get away with it. Stay till the end, this story will shock you. I remember the moment the world shifted under my feet. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when the call came, the kind of call that freezes your blood before your brain even registers the words. "Elara, it's about the house," said my lawyer, her voice unusually tight. "What about it? Is everything okay?" My stomach twisted. "There been a sale." My hand flew to my mouth. A sale, but I haven't even signed anything. I know, that's the strange part. Someone, Callum, I believe, went ahead without your approval. Legally, though, there's a complication. I couldn't breathe. Memories of the house rushed back, the sunlight streaming through the maple trees, the creak of the stairs, Dad humming in the kitchen during Sunday breakfasts. And now, that sanctuary, that inheritance of love and history, was gone, or so I thought. When I got home, Callum was sitting in the living room, a smug smile plastered across his face, a bottle of whiskey half-empty beside him. "Oh, hey, Elara," he said casually, as if nothing catastrophic had happened. I dropped my bag. "You sold the house. How could you?" My voice shook with a mix of rage and disbelief. He leaned back, unbothered. "It was just sitting there empty. I needed the money, Elle. You wouldn't have done anything with it anyway." "You think this is about the money? This is Dad's house, our home. You can't just—" I choked on my words. "You can't just do that." Callum laughed, sharp and bitter. "Legally, I can. I have the papers." The papers? My heart sank. But something inside me whispered, something my father always instilled in me. Attention to detail, patience, and the quiet power of knowledge. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the trust documents Dad had left me, the ones I had glanced at but never fully explored. And that's when I saw it. A clause, simple and precise, almost easy to miss, yet absolute in its authority. Any sale of the property without Elara Dovell's explicit approval was null and void. My father had anticipated that one day someone might try to bypass me, and he had made sure it was impossible. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected, calm. Callum thought he had won. He hadn't even read the fine print, and I had all the power. I didn't say anything immediately. I left him in the living room, nursing his overconfidence, and walked through the house. Every corner was saturated with memory. The staircase we had raced down as children, the kitchen where Dad taught me to bake bread, the Maplewood floor that creaked just so when he tiptoed around at night. This wasn't just property. It was a life he had shared with us, a legacy. The next morning, I called my lawyer back. "We need to act fast. Callum thinks he's in control, but legally, this sale is nothing. We're going to reverse it." By the time Callum realized I had discovered the clause, it was already too late. The documents were submitted to the court, and an emergency injunction froze the sale. I saw him for the first time panic, his usual arrogance replaced by confusion, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route. What did you do?" he stammered, voice low, almost pleading. I sat across from him at the kitchen table, calm but resolute. "I read the trust, Callum. Dad protected this house for me. Not for you, not for your debts, for me. You should have known better than to underestimate me." He slumped back, defeated but not yet completely broken. I knew that. He was stubborn, like our father had been, and the fight wasn't over. But for the first time, I felt the surge of quiet satisfaction that comes from standing firm, armed not with anger but with truth. Days passed, and whispers spread through our small community. Callum had tried to sell the house, and now everyone knew he had failed, humiliated, exposed, his mistakes laid bare. Neighbors I had never spoken to came forward with supportive messages, memories of Dad and our family, reminders that the house wasn't just bricks and timber, but a home filled with love and respect. And in that, I realized something important. Revenge wasn't about destroying him. It was about honoring the life and values Dad had instilled in me, and proving that integrity always outweighs arrogance. But as I walked through the Maplewood halls late at night, I felt a shadow of unease. Callum wasn't done. He was clever, reckless, and desperate. He had underestimated me once, yes, but desperation breeds creativity. I could feel the storm coming, the tension between us thickening like the clouds outside, heavy and inevitable. And then it happened. A message appeared on my phone, anonymous, simple, chilling. "You think you've won? This isn't over, not by a long shot." I stared at it, heart pounding. I knew immediately this was Callum or someone on his side. Someone who wouldn't stop until they had pushed me to the edge. But I also knew something else. I wasn't the same girl who had left the house that morning, trembling at the thought of losing what Dad had given me. I had grown stronger, sharper, and infinitely more determined. I whispered to myself, as if Dad could hear me, "You taught me well. I won't let him win. Not now, not ever." And with that, I looked out over the maple trees, the wind stirring their golden leaves, and felt a surge of resolve. The real battle had just begun. The next morning, the house felt different. Quiet, almost too quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for what was coming next. Callum hadn't spoken since I confronted him, and every creak of the floorboards made me tense. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the golden maple leaves sway in the morning light. I tried to focus on the warmth of the sun, but my mind kept drifting to the message on my phone. "You think you've won. This isn't over." Not by a long shot. I knew it was Callum, or at least someone working for him. He was clever, desperate, and reckless. That combination made him unpredictable. I couldn't afford to underestimate him. Not now. I called my lawyer back, and as she picked up, I barely needed to explain. "He's not done, is he?" "I don't think he ever will be," she replied, voice low. "But the legal footing is solid. As long as the trust is enforced, nothing he does can hold." That was reassuring, but it didn't calm the fluttering in my chest. Callum's arrogance made him bold, and bold men make dangerous mistakes. I wandered through the house, running my fingers along the familiar grooves of the wooden banister. Every memory of Dad seemed alive. The way he would hum while making coffee, the smell of his old pipe in the study, the sound of his laughter echoing through the hall. This was more than a house. It was a lifetime of love, and I couldn't let Callum tarnish it. Hours passed. Callum stayed in the living room, packing intermittently, occasionally glancing at his phone. I pretended not to notice, but my ears were sharp, catching every muttered curse, every frustrated sigh. I could feel his panic simmering under the surface. For the first time, the arrogance I'd always found infuriating in him was replaced by fear. And yet, I couldn't let my guard down. Late afternoon, there was a knock on the door. My heart leapt. Not expecting anyone, I approached cautiously. Through the frosted glass, I could see a figure, a delivery man, ordinary and unthreatening, holding a small envelope. "Signature here, miss," he said, handing it over. I signed, tore the envelope open, and froze. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a note in bold, typed letters. "Check the files you think you know. Not everything is as it seems." My stomach churned. Callum was trying to get inside my head. Or perhaps someone else was watching, feeding him information. Either way, I needed to act. I returned to my laptop and started digging through every document Dad had left, every letter, every note tucked in drawers, anything that could give me insight into Callum's next move. Hours later, I found something unusual, an old ledger Dad had kept, meticulously noting all property-related matters, but also including personal reminders, who he trusted, who he worried about, and most importantly, an addendum about the house. It referenced a private clause in the trust, a safety net I had never fully understood until now. A sudden chill ran down my spine. Callum hadn't known about this. If he did, he might have tried something more subtle, but he hadn't. That gave me the edge. By evening, the first real confrontation came. Callum barged into the study, slamming the door behind him. His eyes were wide, a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You went through the files," he demanded. I looked up calmly, masking the thrill that ran through me. "I did, and it turns out Dad made sure nothing could be done without my consent. You really should have read the fine print." He sank into the chair opposite me, shaking his head. You always were the clever one, weren't you? Always trying to be better. I leaned forward, voice steady. This isn't about being better. It's about doing what's right. You tried to take what wasn't yours. You humiliated yourself and you exposed your mistakes. I'm just here to finish what Dad started, protecting the house and our family's legacy. For a moment, he looked like a boy again, caught between defiance and remorse. But that moment passed, replaced by scheming intensity. He was already plotting his next move, and I could see it in his eyes. Days turned into nights, each passing moment filled with tension. Every phone notification, every knock at the door made my heart jump. I had to remain vigilant, but I also knew that patience was my greatest weapon. Callum's arrogance would be his undoing. Then, one evening, an unexpected visitor arrived. Someone I hadn't seen in years, a family friend who had worked closely with Dad. She looked around the living room, eyes narrowing at the empty whiskey bottle, and then turned to me. "Elara," she said softly, "you need to be careful. He's not just after the house. He's after your confidence, your peace. Callum has always been reckless, but desperate men can go too far." I nodded, absorbing her words. She handed me a folder. Inside were letters and notes that revealed Callum's recent dealings, his gambling, his debts, the very motives that had driven him to sell the house. It wasn't just arrogance anymore. It was desperation, and desperate people are dangerous. I closed the folder, took a deep breath, and looked around the house. Each room held a memory, a lesson, a fragment of our father's life. This wasn't just a fight over property. It was about integrity, resilience, and honoring the love that built this home. And as night fell, I felt a quiet determination settle over me. Callum might think he could manipulate, deceive, or intimidate me. But I had learned patience, strategy, and the value of truth. And the truth was, he had underestimated me again. A sudden ping on my phone broke the silence. Another message, short and deliberate. "You think you're safe, you're not." I stared at it, unflinching. This was the beginning, the real game had started. Callum had made the first move, and I was ready to respond. I whispered to myself, feeling the weight of my father's lessons, the warmth of his memory, and the strength I had always carried inside. "Let him try. I'm ready for him. And this time I won't just win. I'll end it the right way." The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen maple leaves, but it did little to calm the storm inside me. Since the messages and the confrontation, I hadn't slept well. Every shadow in the house seemed longer, every creak louder, and the weight of anticipation pressed down on me like the heavy winter sky over Halifax. Callum was still packing somewhere in the house, restless, and I knew he was already plotting his next move. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the dining table, opening the folder the family friend had given me the night before. Each page told a story, debts I hadn't known about, risky dealings, whispered threats from people I had never met. Callum had underestimated the web he'd woven around himself, but even in his recklessness, he remained dangerous. A knock at the door made me jump. My pulse quickened as I went to answer it. Outside stood Mrs. Lennox, our neighbor who had known Dad since the beginning, her eyes full of concern. "Elara, you must be careful," she said softly, stepping inside. "Callum's desperation isn't just about money anymore. He's testing boundaries and you." I nodded, grateful for her guidance. She handed me an envelope, one I hadn't noticed before. Inside were letters addressed to Callum, threats and warnings from people he had crossed in his gambling ventures. My brother had put himself in a corner, and now the walls were closing in. But that wasn't enough to ease my mind. Knowing Callum, he wouldn't give up easily. He had always believed he could manipulate everyone, and for the first time, I realized he might try to manipulate me too. Hours passed as I meticulously organized the documents, creating a timeline of events and possible next moves. I wasn't just defending the house anymore. I was strategizing, anticipating, and preparing for whatever Callum could throw at me. Late afternoon, a sound made me tense. The front door creaked, and footsteps approached. I peeked from behind the curtain. Callum, carrying a briefcase, moving with the confidence of someone who thinks they've already won. "You're planning something, aren't you?" I called out, voice steady but firm. He smirked. I might be, but you don't know what I've got up my sleeve. I felt a flicker of amusement. Bold, reckless, and still underestimating me. Typical Callum. You really should have read Dad's trust documents more carefully, I replied, keeping my tone calm, almost casual. He paused, eyes narrowing. You think you're untouchable, don't you? I think you've already trapped yourself, I said, closing my laptop with a sense of quiet satisfaction. Every move you make only proves it. Callum's smirk faltered, replaced by a glare. You're lucky I don't want to ruin you, yet. I'm not afraid of you, I said simply. That evening, after he had gone to his room, I sat in the study, reflecting. Callum's arrogance was dangerous, yes, but his desperation made him predictable. I realized that winning wasn't about brute force or confrontation. It was about patience, understanding, and leveraging the truth. The house wasn't just bricks and timber. It was strategy, knowledge, and moral authority. Then, just as I was beginning to feel the weight of exhaustion lift slightly, my phone buzzed. A message, anonymous yet unmistakably meant to intimidate. You've made it this far, but the game isn't over. Watch your back. I stared at it, a chill running down my spine, but deep inside, a fire ignited. Callum might have started the game, but I knew the rules Dad had left me, and I intended to play it to the end. I whispered to myself as I looked out over the Maplewood garden, shadows stretching long in the fading light. Let him try, I'm ready, and this time he won't get away with it. The following morning, the house felt charged with a strange energy. I could sense it in the air, heavy, expectant, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what was to come. Callum had retreated to his room after our tense conversation the night before, but I knew that meant nothing. Men like him, desperate and arrogant, never retreated without planning something in secret. I moved through the familiar rooms, my fingers brushing the worn maple banister, feeling the memories of 1,000 childhood moments pulse beneath my touch. Each creak of the floor reminded me of Dad's presence, a quiet reassurance that I was on the right path. But the nagging worry persisted. Callum's desperation was growing, and desperate men make dangerous decisions. I returned to the study, spreading out the documents from the family friend and the trust files. Every letter, note, and ledger entry revealed a layer of Callum I had never truly understood, reckless, yet cunning, arrogant, yet fearful. I realized I had to anticipate not only his moves but his mindset. Hours passed and the sunlight shifted, casting long shadows across the floor. I barely noticed. My focus was absolute. Then came the first sign of escalation. The phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. Elara Duvall, a voice said, distorted and unfamiliar. Yes, I kept my tone neutral, betraying nothing. You think you've got him cornered, the voice continued, but he's cleverer than you imagine. He's watching, and he's planning. I clenched the phone. Who is this? Silence, then a click, the line went dead. Callum's influence was wider than I had anticipated. Not only was he reckless, but he had allies, people ready to execute his schemes. That knowledge made my skin prickle, but I refused to succumb to fear. I had knowledge, patience, and the law on my side, and that was more powerful than any underhanded trick he could muster. Later that afternoon, I decided to take action. If Callum was going to escalate, I needed to anticipate his moves before he even made them. I began by mapping out his likely contacts, the people he owed money to, and those who might be persuaded to act in his interests. With each layer, the pattern became clear. Desperation was blinding him, and every choice he made carried the seeds of his own downfall. As I worked, I heard a quiet shuffle outside the study door. I froze, listening, footsteps cautious but deliberate. Callum. Elara, he said from the doorway, voice calm but sharp. I need to talk. I looked up from the papers, meeting his gaze steadily. Talk, or are you here to try and intimidate me again? I'm not here to play games, he said, leaning against the doorframe. I need you to understand. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I was protecting you in my own way. Protecting me, I echoed, disbelief lacing my tone. By selling the house without my consent, by risking everything Dad built. His eyes dropped. I didn't think you'd find out about the trust clause. I thought it would be easier if I handled it myself. I could see the conflict in him, part fear, part arrogance, part regret, but I didn't let it soften my resolve. Callum, this isn't about fear or regret. It's about doing what's right. And right now, that means undoing what you've done. He looked away, frustrated. I can't just back down, not now. That's fine, I said softly, almost pityingly. You've already trapped yourself. Every move you make without thought, without guidance, only proves it. You can either accept it or continue down a path that will destroy you. He clenched his fists, a shudder of frustration running through him. You always think you're so clever, always planning, always calculating. Maybe this time you've won, but don't think for a second this ends here. I stood and walked past him toward the window, letting the late afternoon light fall on me. It doesn't end when you lose, Callum. It ends when you understand that arrogance and desperation can never outmatch truth and integrity. The day faded into evening. I moved through the house, checking locks, reviewing documents, and preparing for whatever Callum might attempt next. Each step reinforced a growing confidence, the kind that comes not from revenge, but from knowing you are in the right, morally and legally. As night fell, the tension in the house was palpable. Every sound, the wind rustling the maple leaves outside, the occasional creak of the old roof, the distant hum of the streetlights, made my senses sharp. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea, and reviewed my strategy one last time. Then, just as I was beginning to feel the weight of exhaustion lift, a subtle vibration on my phone caught my attention. Another message, simple but deliberate. You can't protect everything forever. He's coming for what matters most. I stared at it, heart steady, mind alert. This was no idle threat. Callum's desperation had reached a point where he might take risks, endangering more than just property. And yet, I did not falter. I felt the strength Dad had instilled in me, the patience, the moral clarity, the resilience. I whispered to myself, feeling a chill of anticipation but also a fire of determination. He thinks he can push me. Let him try. I am ready. And this time I will not just defend, I will reclaim everything he has tried to take. In the stillness of the house, I made my decision. I would watch, wait, and let Callum's own recklessness expose him. Every ally he tried to manipulate, every deceitful move he made, would unravel because I had truth, foresight, and patience on my side. The game was no longer about survival. It was about strategy, integrity, and ultimate vindication. As I turned off the kitchen light and moved through the house, shadows stretching across familiar rooms, I knew one thing for certain. Callum's next move would be his most reckless yet, and I would be ready. The real battle was just beginning. A silent, strategic war of wills, one that would test not only our knowledge of each other but the very values Dad had lived by. And I intended to emerge victorious, not through anger, but through the quiet power of truth and resilience. The morning light filtered softly through the maple trees outside, but inside the house, tension hung thick in the air. Since the messages and the confrontations with Callum, every moment had been a delicate balance between vigilance and strategy. I knew that he wouldn't give up, and deep down, I understood that the next moves would be crucial, not just for the house, but for our family's legacy. I sat at the study desk, spreading out the trust documents, letters, and the notes from Mrs. Lennox and the family friend. Each paper told a story, a pattern emerging like a map of Callum's recklessness. I realized that his desperation was his greatest weakness, and weaknesses, when understood, could be turned into advantage. My phone buzzed, a short vibration that made my heart skip a beat. Another anonymous message. The walls have ears. Watch your back. Time is running out. Callum's reach was wider than I had imagined. Not only was he reckless, but he was enlisting others, people who might try to intimidate me or manipulate situations in his favor. But that knowledge gave me power, not fear. I needed to act preemptively, to anticipate rather than react. I started by reviewing every recent transaction, every contact, and every potential ally Callum might have tried to involve. Patterns appeared, mistakes that only someone desperate would make. My father's wisdom resonated in my mind. Patience, foresight, and integrity are far stronger than arrogance and haste. Around midday, a knock at the front door made me tense. Not the casual knocks of neighbors, but deliberate, calculated. I approached cautiously and peered through the frosted glass. It was Mr. Kessler, one of Dad's oldest friends and a trusted advisor. He carried a leather-bound folder under his arm, his expression serious. "Elara," he said as he stepped inside, "you need to see this. Callum's recent actions have drawn attention, and some people involved aren't trustworthy. You must prepare for more than just legal battles." He handed me the folder. Inside were letters, emails, and handwritten notes revealing Callum's recent interactions, not just with lenders, but with strangers whose intentions were unclear, possibly dangerous. My brother's desperation had indeed made him careless, exposing vulnerabilities that could escalate if not addressed. I absorbed the information, my mind already forming strategies. It wasn't enough to rely on legal protection alone. I had to anticipate, predict, and act before he did. The house wasn't just property. It was a stage, a battlefield, and I was learning to play every move with precision. As the afternoon waned, Callum emerged from his room, carrying himself with feigned calm. "I see you've been busy," he said, voice even but eyes calculating. "I could say the same about you," I replied, standing by the window, the light casting long shadows across the floor. "Planning, scheming, hopping to catch me off guard." He smirked briefly. "Perhaps, but you underestimate me as always. You've grown stronger, yes, but desperation can drive anyone to cleverness." I met his gaze, unflinching. "Cleverness without foresight is reckless. You've made mistakes, Callum. Now it's time to face the consequences." His expression hardened. "You think you've won, but winning isn't over yet. You're only part of the game." I felt a flicker of concern, quickly replaced by determination. He was dangerous, yes, but predictable in his recklessness. Every decision he had made so far carried the signature of panic and arrogance. I would use that. The evening shadows deepened, and I retreated to the study to plan my next steps. I organized all the documents, highlighting every point where Callum had overstepped, every move he had made that could be legally and strategically countered. I wasn't just protecting the house anymore. I was orchestrating the unraveling of his reckless schemes. Late at night, a quiet vibration on my phone signaled another message. "You're clever, Elara, but cleverness won't save you forever." I stared at the screen, my heart steady. This wasn't just a threat. It was a challenge, one I was ready to meet. I whispered to myself, feeling the weight of my father's teachings, the memories of every lesson he had imparted. "Let him try. I am ready. I know the rules. And this time I will control the outcome." Outside, the wind rustled through the golden maple leaves, the shadows shifting as if in anticipation. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. And I was prepared to face it, not with anger or fear, but with the quiet power of truth, patience, and resilience. As I closed the folder and glanced around the study, a thought struck me sharply. Callum's next move would be bold, and perhaps dangerous. But the house, our legacy, and the lessons of my father's life had armed me with more than just legal protection. They had given me foresight, clarity, and the moral strength to stand firm no matter what came next. And in that moment, I realized the real battle was only beginning. Night had fallen, but the house was alive with tension. Shadows stretched across the familiar walls, every creak and sigh magnified in the quiet. Callum had been unusually silent since our conversation earlier, and that worried me more than his usual arrogance. Silence, after all, can hide plans far more dangerous than words. I sat in the study, surrounded by the trust documents and folders detailing his recent dealings. Each piece of paper, each letter, told a story of desperation, reckless loans, questionable contacts, and people who could be persuaded to act on his behalf. My father had prepared me for this in ways Callum could never understand: knowledge, foresight, and the power of patience. A sudden knock on the front door made my pulse quicken. Not the casual knock of a neighbor, but deliberate, cautious. I approached slowly, peering through the frosted glass. A courier stood there, holding a small, unmarked box. "Signature here, please," he said. I signed, took the box, and carried it to the kitchen table. Inside was a single envelope. No name, no return address, just a typed note. "You think you're ahead, but the next move is mine. Watch closely." A chill ran down my spine, but I refused to let it shake me. This was exactly the kind of escalation I had anticipated. Callum's desperation had driven him to subtle threats, using others to unsettle me. But I was ready. I opened the envelope further, finding photographs. At first glance, they seemed innocuous, snapshots of the house, the driveway, and the nearby streets. But then I noticed subtle details. Someone had been observing, documenting every entrance, every window. Callum was preparing, testing boundaries, learning patterns. My mind raced. I needed to act decisively. I began reviewing every security measure in the house, every possible vulnerability, anticipating his next steps. Every plan he had made carried the same flaw, arrogance. He assumed I would be unprepared, that fear would cloud my judgment. He was wrong. Hours later, the first confrontation arrived. Callum emerged from his room, eyes sharp, moving with the precision of someone confident yet cautious. "You've been busy," he said, voice calm but measured. I didn't flinch. "I've been preparing. Unlike you, I consider the consequences before I act." He smirked briefly, though there was tension beneath the surface. Cleverness is one thing, but desperation can push anyone to do things they never thought possible. "And recklessness will always expose itself," I countered, standing my ground. "You've already made your mistakes, Callum. Every move you've taken has only cornered yourself further." He stared at me, a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You really think you've won? This is far from over. I won't let it end like this." "I don't need to win," I said quietly. "I just need to do what's right. The house, Dad's legacy, our family's history, that isn't yours to gamble with. You should have understood that before making your first move." For a long moment, he said nothing. His gaze drifted around the room, taking in the folders, the documents, the proof of his miscalculations. I saw a flicker of frustration, a shadow of regret, but it was fleeting. Desperation would always win over reflection for him. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke, almost quietly, almost vulnerable. "I didn't think you'd fight like this. I underestimated you." I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Underestimating people always leads to regret. You've had your chance, Callum. Now it's time to face the truth." Evening descended fully, and the house grew still, save for the distant rustle of leaves outside. I took a deep breath, knowing the night would be long. Callum's next move could be bold, perhaps even reckless, but I had learned patience, foresight, and the quiet power of strategy. As midnight approached, my phone buzzed again. Another message, chilling and deliberate. "The game isn't just about the house anymore. Think carefully. What matters most is coming next." I stared at it, heart steady, mind alert. This wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. Callum was escalating, moving beyond the house, targeting things I valued deeply. But instead of fear, I felt resolve. Every decision I made from here would be deliberate, calculated, and anchored in truth and integrity. I whispered to myself, feeling Dad's presence in every memory of the house. Let him try. He thinks desperation will give him power. But I have patience, foresight, and truth, and that's stronger than anything he can muster. The night stretched on, shadows shifting and stretching across every familiar room. I moved quietly, double-checking locks, reviewing documents, and reinforcing my preparations. Every corner of the house, every memory of Dad, every lesson he had imparted was a shield, a reminder that I wasn't just defending property. I was defending the values he had lived by. Outside, the wind rustled through the golden maple leaves, carrying the sense of inevitability. Callum's next move would be his most daring yet, and I would be ready, waiting with the quiet confidence of someone who knows the rules, understands the stakes, and refuses to falter. In that stillness, I realized something important. The battle wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about strategy, integrity, and the power of knowledge. Callum might have started the game, but I was controlling the board. And as I turned off the lights and moved through the house, the shadows lengthening, I knew one thing for certain: the real confrontation was coming, and this time it would reveal everything. Morning came slowly, the Halifax streets bathed in soft, pale light. The Maplewood house felt heavier today, as if aware of the storm that was quietly brewing inside. Ever since Callum's escalating threats and the anonymous messages, the air seemed charged, every corner a reminder that the next move could come at any moment. I walked through the hallways, my fingers brushing the familiar grooves of the wood, memories of Dad flickering with every step. His voice, his lessons, the way he had carefully protected everything he loved, they were alive in my mind. This wasn't just a house, it was a testament, and I would defend it. Sitting in the study, I reviewed the folders again, mapping every possible angle of Callum's actions. Every letter, every email, every note, patterns emerged. His desperation had led him into reckless alliances, and with each decision, he had created vulnerabilities. My father's foresight had equipped me to see them, and now it was my advantage. Mid-morning, the knock came soft, deliberate. I tensed, instinctively moving toward the window. Outside stood Mrs. Lennox, her expression serious. "Elara," she said quietly, stepping inside. "I've heard things, rumors about Callum reaching out to people he shouldn't. This is bigger than just the house. You need to be careful, more careful than ever." I nodded, my mind already racing. I've anticipated that. Every contact he's made, every step he's taken, I've mapped it. I'm ready, Mrs. Lennox, but thank you for coming. Her eyes softened. "You're strong, Elara, but strength alone won't be enough. He's desperate now. Desperate people are dangerous." Her words settled in my chest like a weight. I understood. Callum's desperation would push him further than arrogance ever could. I needed to anticipate the unthinkable. As she left, I turned to the documents again. Something caught my eye, a pattern I had missed before. Certain contacts he had made were tied to locations close to the house, places where surveillance might already exist. He wasn't just testing boundaries, he was trying to intimidate, to unsettle me, and perhaps to claim an advantage. I felt a surge of resolve. If he thought I would be shaken, he was mistaken. Every move he made, I would counter. Every strategy he devised, I would anticipate. Patience, clarity, and foresight were my allies. Afternoon arrived with a soft drizzle, maple leaves glistening wet in the muted light. I reviewed the house's security systems, ensuring every angle, every possible entrance was accounted for. Each click of the locks, each step through the hallways, reminded me that this wasn't just about defense. It was about preparation, strategy, and moral authority. Then the first direct escalation came. Callum appeared in the living room, unannounced, his expression sharp, his presence a challenge. "Elara," he said smoothly, as if rehearsed, "I think it's time we talk seriously. No games, no tricks, just honesty." I didn't rise, didn't flinch. "Honesty?" I echoed, tone even calm. "You sold the house without my consent. You thought you could manipulate everything and everyone around you. That isn't honesty, Callum, that's arrogance." He paused, a flicker of irritation in his eyes. "You've grown clever, I'll give you that, but cleverness won't save you from what's coming." "I don't need saving," I said firmly. "I need truth, integrity, and protection for what's rightfully mine, and that, Callum, I already have." His jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied the room, the folders, the meticulous evidence of his own failures. And then he said, quietly, almost reluctantly, "I didn't think it would go this far. I underestimated you." I let that moment linger, letting him see the weight of his miscalculation. "Underestimation can be dangerous," I said softly, "and now you're learning that firsthand." He left shortly after, silent this time, but I knew the tension was only growing. His next move would be bolder, riskier, and perhaps reckless. But I was prepared, grounded in the knowledge, strategy, and moral clarity that my father had instilled in me. Night came, quiet but charged. I sat by the window, watching the rain trace silver lines down the glass, reflecting the maple leaves' golden glow. Another message arrived on my phone. "You've prepared well, but the game changes tonight. Be ready." I didn't flinch. Instead, I felt a steady fire ignite within me. Callum's desperation would always be his undoing. Every reckless choice, every bold move would expose him further. I whispered softly to the empty room, to the memories of Dad, to the house itself. Let him come. I am ready. I know the rules. And this time the truth will guide every step. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside the house. Tensions, strategies, and emotions swirling, each waiting for the other to act first. And I knew, with quiet certainty, that I was in control. Night had fallen over Halifax, the rain tapping softly against the windows of the Maplewood house. Inside, the air was thick with anticipation. Callum's silence throughout the day had been unnerving, each quiet moment charged with the possibility of sudden action. I moved through the rooms with careful steps, every creak of the floor under my feet a reminder that I had to remain vigilant. I returned to the study, reviewing the documents, letters, and files once more. My eyes scanned for any missed detail, any potential move Callum might have prepared. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of his desperation, risky loans, secretive contacts, and a growing sense of recklessness. His arrogance, combined with panic, made him predictable, but still dangerous. A soft vibration on my phone drew my attention. Another message, short and deliberate. Tonight, everything changes. Watch closely, your move matters. I knew instantly that this was more than a warning. It was a challenge. Callum was escalating, preparing to take a risk that could either work in his favor or undo him completely. My pulse quickened, but fear did not grip me. Instead, a quiet determination settled over me. Patience, strategy, and moral clarity were my allies. Around midnight, the first sign of his move appeared. The security system pinged, a minor breach detected at the side entrance. I rushed to the monitor, eyes narrowing at the grainy black and white footage. A figure moved cautiously near the entrance. Callum, or someone he had enlisted. I quickly adjusted the cameras, locking all entrances and alerting local security. The contact's Dad had left me in case of emergencies. The figure froze under the glare of the motion sensors, then retreated into the shadows. I breathed a quiet sigh of relief, but knew this was only the beginning. Minutes later, the doorbell rang, a deliberate, echoing chime that filled the house. I approached the door cautiously, phone in hand, ready to alert authorities at the slightest sign of threat. Through the frosted glass, I saw a familiar silhouette. Callum, carrying a briefcase, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Elara," he said, voice calm but edged with tension. "We need to resolve this. Now, no more games." I didn't move immediately. "Resolve? You mean on your terms? You've already made your choices, Callum. Now it's time to face the consequences." He stepped closer, briefcase in hand, and I realized he wasn't just here to intimidate. The weight of the briefcase, the deliberate pace, suggested he had come prepared, perhaps with documents, perhaps with something more. "I thought I could fix things," he said quietly, almost pleading. "I didn't want to humiliate either of us. I wanted control." Control. That word carried arrogance and desperation in equal measure. I met his gaze, unflinching. "Control doesn't belong to you, Callum. It never did. You sold what wasn't yours, gambled with family trust, and now you face the results." He let out a frustrated sigh, leaning against the doorframe. "You always think you know the outcome, don't you? That you can plan everything. But sometimes, life isn't predictable." I shook my head. Life may not be predictable, but human nature is. Arrogance and desperation will always reveal themselves. And that's where I stand, ready, aware, and unshaken. For a long moment, he said nothing, his eyes scanning the study, the folders, the very evidence of his miscalculations. And then he spoke, almost softly, almost regretfully. "I didn't think I would lose like this. I didn't expect you to see through everything." I let the silence linger, letting the weight of truth settle. "You underestimated me, Callum, and that is the mistake that will define this chapter of your life." Outside, the rain intensified, dripping down the maple leaves, splashing against the driveway. The world felt suspended, every moment drawn out, heavy with expectation. I could sense that Callum's next move would be bold, perhaps reckless, and likely his most dangerous yet. I prepared myself, reviewing my strategy, securing every room, and ensuring that the house, and what it represented, was protected. Every memory, every lesson from Dad, every fragment of integrity that the house embodied was my shield. Then the briefcase opened on the table between us. Inside were papers, contracts, documents, and handwritten notes. But as I glanced through them, my eyes caught something unexpected: evidence of Callum's own vulnerabilities, mistakes that could be leveraged. He had come thinking he could challenge me, but he had unwittingly provided the tools for his own downfall. I looked up at him, voice calm but firm. "These mistakes are your undoing, Callum. You handed me the means to defend what is rightfully mine, and now there's no turning back." He stared, a mix of disbelief and growing fear crossing his face. You can't use this. You won't." I shook my head. "I will, and I must, because this isn't about winning against you. It's about protecting what matters most: integrity, family, and truth." The tension in the room was almost tangible, the storm outside echoing the battle unfolding within the walls of the Maplewood house. Callum's next move would determine everything, but I was ready. Each decision, each calculated step, was grounded in foresight, moral clarity, and unwavering resolve. As I looked at him, the realization struck me fully. Callum's arrogance had blinded him, his desperation had led him to reckless choices, and now, the truth, combined with strategy and patience, would be his ultimate undoing. And as the clock ticked toward the early hours of the morning, I whispered quietly, to the house, to Dad's memory, to my own resolve. "Let him try. He thinks he can challenge me. But I know the rules, I know the stakes, and this time I will see it through, completely, decisively, and with integrity." Dawn arrived on tired feet, the pale light slipping through the maple branches like a promise. The house felt smaller somehow, every room narrowed by the weight of what had happened and what might still come. Callum's briefcase on the kitchen table had been the most honest thing he'd offered, full of the very evidence of his own undoing, and yet the danger felt closer than ever. He'd escalated, tested boundaries, and now the situation had teeth. I moved through the morning ritual as if it were armor. Tea, toast, a careful run through the files spread across the study. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked once, twice, then fell silent. Inside, only the soft scratch of my pen as I annotated margins, circled dates, matched names to threats. Strategy was becoming second nature. I found a small, fierce comfort in the methodical work. It steadied me. There was a rhythm to revenge that isn't about anger, it's about justice, about correcting a wrong with patience and precision. I thought of Dad, of the way he taught me to read between lines, to trust quiet details. He had always said, "Rules matter, El. They're the bones of fairness." I held that like a talisman. Around midday, Mr. Kessler rang. He'd come by with a folder of his own, and when he stepped inside, his face carried the fatigue of someone who had watched one person's small storm grow into something uglier. "Elara," he said, voice low, "there are people asking questions, people you don't want to notice this." He placed the folder on the table. Inside were copies of messages, informal talk from the lenders Callum had owed, men with names that made the back of my neck prickle. They weren't local bluster. They sounded organized, patient. "Do they think Callum still has access to the house?" I asked, skimming a note. "Some of them do," he replied. "Others are simply waiting to see how this plays out. That's the dangerous type. They profit from uncertainty." He paused. "You're doing the right thing, Elara, but it might be time to widen the circle of people who know what's going on." I considered this. Up until now, I'd kept the circle small: lawyer, trusted neighbors, Mr. Kessler. But widening it meant trusting others with fragile things. Our family history, the trust, my anger. It also meant pulling more hands onto the pulley that would lift this whole mess into the light. I nodded. "Do it," I said. "Tell those who matter. Not gossip, not spectacle, people who will act carefully and with conviction." He pressed his palm briefly against mine, a silent pledge. "I'll do it." After he left, I called the lawyer again and briefed her on every new detail. We agreed on public posture, quiet, factual, no sensational statements. The court injunction stood, yes, but the emotional battle was spreading through town, and narrative matters, reputation matters. Callum's attempts at humiliation had already done damage to him. The rest was about ensuring the house, and the truth, stayed intact. Afternoon light slanted through the curtains, and for a moment I let myself breathe. I took the dog-eared recipe book Dad used to favor and opened it, reading the margin notes, his messy handwriting, a joke scribbled next to a baking time. I smiled despite everything. That small human thing reminded me why I fought, not for punishment, but for memory. Then a call that shifted the day's axis. My phone lit up with a number I recognized, an old colleague of Dad, who'd retired from the council. He'd been helpful before, now his voice carried urgency. "Elara," he said, "there's someone here asking about the title records. A solicitor from out of town, apparently representing the buyer who thinks they've been sold the property." My stomach tightened, but the sale's frozen, the injunction. It doesn't matter. People will ask questions, and when they do, they muddy things. If that solicitor starts suggesting the sale was legitimate, you could end up in a long paper fight. He exhaled. "Elara, you need to show public clarity, make the facts visible, don't let them shape the narrative." I thanked him and hung up. The thought of another solicitor wandering through our paperwork, poking at loose corners, made me restless. Callum's reach had at least one channel I hadn't entirely closed, other legal actors who might be persuaded by a story or pressure. If they started to claim legitimacy for the sale, it would be harder and nastier to undo. I decided then to hold a small, controlled meeting at the house, not a press spectacle, but a gathering of people who could anchor the truth. Mr. Kessler, Mrs. Lennox, the retired council colleague, and my lawyer. People who would stand as witnesses to the trust, to Dad's intent, and to the town's memory. I wanted this circumscribed, respectful, and unassailable. By late afternoon, the group assembled. The house filled with their soft murmurs, the elder voices knitting our family's story into something public and undeniable. Mr. Kessler recited facts. Mrs. Lennox offered memories of Dad that were precise and human. The lawyer laid out the trust clause again, firm and patient. The gathering felt like fortification. People left with copies of documents, names to call, concrete actions to take if anyone tried to challenge the injunction. Callum watched all of it from the doorway, bitterness clear on his face. His eyes met mine briefly and then slid away. He had realized, if he hadn't before, that public opinion and community testimony were forces he couldn't easily buy or bully. For someone used to quick fixes, it was a new kind of defeat. As evening settled, I felt briefly buoyed, as if we'd built something strong in those quiet hours. But the buoyancy was short-lived. A message slid across my phone screen like a shard. "Public acts don't help forever. You can prepare witnesses, but you can't stop what comes from behind closed doors." No signature, no pretense, just a whisper of menace. I paused, fingers still on the glass. The message was a reminder that the war had more fronts. Legal clarity and community support were powerful, but they didn't reach into every dark place. There were people who could, and might, move quietly under the cover of night, move into corners that law and reputation couldn't immediately touch. That night I walked the house with a torch, checking windows, testing locks, walking the perimeter. The beam caught small things, footprints in the damp soil, an indentation near the side gate, a scrap of paper half buried under the hedge. Someone had been close enough to test our defenses. It was a small victory to find the signs, a small alarm to know how near the risk was. Standing by the back door, I leaned my forehead against the cool wood and thought about the choices ahead. I had orchestrated a public defense. I had gathered witnesses and legal weight. But strategy is never finished, it evolves. Callum's next move would likely be private, personal. Aimed to unsettle rather than legally challenge. He wanted me to feel unsafe, to make me doubt. He wanted leverage. I whispered to the empty room as if the house itself were an ally. "You wanted the map, Callum. Here it is. You wanted to press where it hurts. But you forgot someone, the person who knows every corner, every hinge, every memory here. That person will not be moved." The wind lifted the maple leaves outside, and for a second there was a silver rustle that sounded like applause. It steadied me. I knew now that the endgame wouldn't be shame or spectacle. It would be the slow, inevitable unraveling of bad choices. And I would be there to watch it, to guide it, and to ensure that when the last move fell, it would be on the side of truth. Then the phone buzzed again. A new message, different tone. Short, almost clinical. You've been organized, admirable, but not enough. Tonight we test loyalty. My breath hitched. Loyalty, which loyalty, whose? And what would the test demand? I swallowed, feeling the full weight of the question. This fight had moved from public squares into private loyalties, and that was the most dangerous place of all. Night had settled over Halifax like a velvet curtain, and the house seemed almost alive, every creak and sigh amplified in the stillness. The message from earlier, cryptic and menacing, "Tonight, we test loyalty," echoed in my mind. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with anticipation. Whoever tried to undermine me tonight would find me ready, grounded in strategy and moral clarity. I moved through the house with deliberate calm, checking locks, reviewing every security camera angle, ensuring the perimeter was secure. The shadows outside stretched unnaturally, as if warning me of the storm to come. My father's lessons echoed in my mind. Patience, observation, and preparation are more powerful than anger or haste. By midnight, the first signs appeared. A soft sound at the back gate, footsteps, careful and calculated. I peered through the security monitor, a figure moving slowly in the rain, slipping between the maple trees. Callum, possibly, or one of the unknown contacts he had tried to manipulate. I felt no panic, only focus. This was the culmination of every precaution I had taken, every document reviewed, every ally consulted. I activated a silent alert to the neighbors I trusted, ensuring someone would witness any misstep. Then, cautiously, I moved to the side entrance, flashlight in hand, ready to confront whoever dared breach the property. The figure hesitated, almost frozen under the faint light, and I recognized the unmistakable outline. Callum. The briefcase he had brought yesterday was gone, but his posture carried the same arrogance, the same reckless confidence that had always defined him. "Elara," he called softly, his voice carrying a mixture of frustration and fear. "This ends tonight. I can't let it continue like this." "Continue like this?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, even. "You mean the consequences of your own choices, Callum. The house, the trust, our father's legacy, you gambled it all away. I'm just the one making sure the truth survives." He stepped closer, boots squelching softly on the wet grass, and I realized he wasn't acting alone. Shadows shifted behind him. Figures, two more, moving cautiously, watching. The message had been true. Loyalty would be tested tonight, but not mine. I held my ground. If this is a test, you've already failed. Integrity, truth, and foresight aren't lessons you can manipulate. They're earned. Callum's jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, I saw hesitation, a flicker of recognition that his desperation had overreached. Then he spoke, almost quietly. "You think you're untouchable, but everyone has a weakness." I tilted my head, watching him carefully. "Yes, everyone has a weakness, but I've spent months knowing mine, and more importantly, knowing yours. That's the difference between control and chaos, Callum. You've been reckless, and now you face the outcome." He swallowed, anger and disbelief flashing across his face. "You can't destroy me," he said, almost a whisper. "Not completely." I smiled faintly. Destruction isn't the goal. Exposure is. Truth always has power over lies. The night air carried a tense silence. I saw the figures behind him shift uneasily. They were not seasoned operators. They were desperate allies of a desperate man. I realized then that Callum had overplayed his hand. Each reckless alliance, every bribe, every hidden contract, all were now tools I could use, quietly, patiently. I reached for my phone and sent a short, discreet message to my lawyer and Mr. Kessler. "Immediate, house, security breach, backup ready." Almost immediately, lights flickered on in the neighboring properties. Trusted allies moved into position. Callum's figures froze, realizing the balance of power had shifted. "Stop," Callum shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "This isn't what I intended." "It doesn't matter what you intended," I said firmly. "Intentions don't undo consequences. Every choice you made tonight, and in the months leading here, has brought you to this moment." The figures behind him began to retreat. Callum's facade of control crumbled. He glanced at them, panic rising. "No, wait, I didn't." I stepped forward, voice calm, unwavering. "It's over, Callum. Every door you tried to open, every strategy you plotted, every attempt to unsettle me, all of it is visible now. And there's no hiding from truth." The rain had stopped, leaving a stillness punctuated only by the distant sounds of sirens and the rustle of leaves. Callum's shoulders slumped, his expression a mixture of shame, fear, and disbelief. You really planned everything," he whispered, almost to himself. "I didn't just plan," I said softly. "I acted with foresight, patience, and integrity, something you've consistently ignored. That's why you lost. Not because I wanted to, but because truth has its own strength." He didn't respond. He just stared, the weight of defeat settling like a physical presence. The allies he had called to test loyalty quietly withdrew, leaving him exposed, isolated. I felt a strange calm wash over me, a release of tension built over months. The house, the legacy, the lessons from Dad, they had prevailed. And yet, in that calm, I knew this wasn't just an end. It was a culmination, a lesson etched in reality. Control, foresight, and moral clarity had won. Callum finally turned, moving slowly back toward the road, empty-handed and broken, aware now that arrogance and desperation could not withstand preparation, truth, and patience. I watched him go, feeling the weight of every night spent planning, every conversation, every careful step. The house was safe, the legacy intact, and the moral of it all clear. Choices carry consequences, and integrity always leaves a footprint stronger than any lie. As I closed the door and locked it, I whispered to the quiet house, to the memories of Dad, and to myself. This is what patience, truth, and strength look like. The storm has passed, and now the house and what it stands for will endure. Outside, the maple leaves glimmered in the first light of dawn, peaceful and resilient. Inside, I felt it too, a sense of resolution, of quiet victory, and the knowledge that every lesson had been earned the hard way. And in that stillness, I knew the journey was complete. Callum's arrogance and haste had been his downfall. My quiet strength had endured. The house, the trust, and the legacy all survived. The first rays of dawn filtered through the maplewood trees, casting golden streaks across the house that had seen so much love, betrayal, memory, and now reckoning. I walked slowly through the hallways, letting my fingers graze the familiar woodwork, the walls lined with echoes of Dad's voice, his lessons, and the laughter of childhood. Every step reminded me why this house, and the legacy it held, mattered so deeply. Callum had retreated, but the tension hadn't fully lifted. Desperation leaves marks in people, in spaces, in the air, and I could still feel it lingering, a shadow among the sunlight. I had learned long ago that the final act often required patience and observation, a clear mind and a steady heart. Today, it would be tested to its fullest. I sat at the kitchen table, reviewing the documents one last time, making sure every copy, every witness statement, every piece of evidence was in order. My lawyer had arranged for the remaining paperwork to be filed first thing in the morning. The injunction, the trust, the public affirmation of Dad's intentions, all secured. The legal battle was nearly over, but emotional closure demanded more. A soft knock on the door drew me from my thoughts. Mrs. Lennox stood there, coat damp from the morning drizzle, her eyes reflecting concern and quiet pride. "Elara," she said softly, "you've done more than anyone could have expected. But sometimes the hardest part isn't winning the fight. It's living with what the fight leaves behind." I nodded, understanding her meaning without needing words. "I know. That's why I have to see it through carefully, to make sure the story ends rightly for all of us." She smiled faintly, pressing a small envelope into my hand. "A letter from someone who wants you to have this. Read it when you're ready." I thanked her, and after she left, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Dad's handwriting unmistakable, preserved for me through time. "Elara, strength is quiet. Patience is powerful. Integrity outlasts arrogance. Protect what matters and you will never be alone." A warmth spread through me. Dad's presence, though gone, had been guiding every step. Every decision, every calculated move, Every patience-tested night had been rooted in the lessons he left behind. I felt fortified, ready to face whatever remained of this journey. By mid-morning, the lawyer arrived, carrying the final set of legal papers. We went through every page, verifying signatures, confirming conditions, and ensuring that no loophole remained for Callum or anyone else to exploit. Each stamp, each seal, each carefully worded clause was a testament to foresight and preparation. "Everything is in order," she said at last, relief softening her voice. "You've done exceptionally well, Elara. This will hold legally and morally." I exhaled, a sense of quiet triumph settling in. But there was one final step, a reconciliation with the past, a moment to honor what truly mattered. I moved through the house, room by room, memory by memory, pausing at the places that held Dad's most vivid presence. The study where he worked, the kitchen where he laughed, the porch where he once promised that family would always endure. It was then I heard a sound from the driveway, soft, hesitant footsteps. My heart skipped, but not with fear. It was measured, steady. I moved to the window, and there he was, Callum. Alone this time, his shoulders weighed down not just by the night, but by the truth of his own choices. He saw me and stopped, uncertain, unarmed, unprepared for confrontation beyond acknowledgement. There was no briefcase, no message, no manipulation, only the man who had tried to defy the lessons he could not grasp. "Elara," he said quietly, voice low, almost vulnerable. I don't know how to fix this." I stepped onto the porch, letting the morning sun illuminate my face. "Some things can't be fixed with words, Callum. They can only be understood with honesty and acceptance. You chose your path, and now you must face it." He nodded slowly, a mixture of shame and relief crossing his features. "I underestimated you. I never understood Dad's intentions, your strength." "You will understand," I said softly, "when you see how choices, patience, and integrity matter more than arrogance and recklessness. This house, our family's story, isn't about revenge. It's about lessons learned and respect earned." For a long moment, we stood in silence. The maple leaves shimmered with dew, the morning wind gentle and forgiving. I realized then that the true resolution wasn't in victory over him, but in the preservation of what mattered: family, memory, and truth. Callum finally exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing. I see that now," he admitted. "I'm sorry. I will make amends in whatever way I can." I nodded, letting him feel the weight of his words. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing his mistakes. It was about acknowledging the human lessons embedded in them. Later, after he left, I walked to the porch and looked out over the maple trees, golden in the morning sun. The house was quiet, steady, unbroken. The storms had passed, the battles fought, the lessons engraved into memory and stone. I felt a sense of completion, the calm that comes not from conquest, but from alignment with truth and integrity. I whispered softly, as if to Dad himself, or perhaps to the universe. "We endured. We protected what mattered. The house, our family, the legacy, all of it remains. And that's enough." The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of maple and rain. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift, replaced by clarity and peace. I knew the journey had been difficult, full of deception, testing, and moral trials. But the lesson was clear. Quiet strength, patience, and integrity outlast arrogance, greed, and recklessness. As I stepped inside, closing the door behind me, I felt the house breathe with me, alive with memory, fortified by truth, and ready for the future. The storm had passed, Callum had faced the consequences of his choices, and I had honored the legacy left for me. This was the final chapter, not in bitterness or anger, but in quiet, moral victory. And in that stillness, I knew the story, my story, had finally found its ending. The sun climbed higher over Halifax, golden light spilling through the maple trees, and illuminating the house that had seen so much sorrow, conflict, hope, and now, resolution. I moved through the hallways slowly, letting each familiar corner, each groove in the wooden floor, remind me of the journey that had brought me here. Every memory of Dad, every lesson he had whispered or written down, had been a step toward this moment. Callum had left the night before, his pride bruised and his eyes open to the consequences of his choices. But closure wasn't about him anymore. It was about the house, about the legacy, and about reclaiming a sense of peace for myself. I could feel it in the walls, in the air, in the quiet hum of life that had returned after months of tension. I walked into the study, where Dad had spent hours planning, dreaming, and protecting what mattered most. I touched the corner of his old desk, polished smooth by years of careful hands, and I allowed myself a small smile. This was more than just a house. It was the embodiment of integrity, patience, and love, things that no trick, no deceit, no arrogance could ever erase. The lawyer arrived with the final confirmations. Every document had been filed, every clause verified. The injunction was permanent, the trust fully respected. Callum's attempts to manipulate, to sell, to hide were officially null and void. Every choice he had made, every desperate alliance he had formed, had unraveled in the face of patience and truth. "You've done everything right," she said softly, sliding the last folder across the table. "The law is behind you, the community is behind you, and your father's intent is clear. Nothing can challenge it now." I nodded, a quiet strength settling in my chest. "It wasn't about the law alone," I said. "It was about making sure the legacy, his memory, his values remained intact. That was the true fight." She smiled, understanding. "And you've won it completely." Later, Mrs. Lennox stopped by once more, carrying tea and a sense of calm reassurance. We sat together in the sunlit kitchen, the rain-soaked world outside now gleaming with clarity. "You've shown remarkable patience, Elara," she said. "I can't think of anyone who could have navigated this with such integrity." I allowed myself a deep breath. It wasn't easy. Every night, every message, every calculated risk, it tested me. But I understood something fundamental. Strength isn't about force. It's about clarity, foresight, and moral certainty. That's what protected the house and our family's story. She nodded, her eyes reflecting pride and quiet relief. "And now, what will you do?" I looked out the window, at the golden maple leaves swaying gently in the morning light. "I will continue to live here, honoring Dad's memory, preserving what matters, and teaching the lessons he wanted me to carry forward. This house isn't just wood and nails, it's values, patience, and love. That is what will endure." Afternoon came with the sound of laughter, not loud, not boisterous, but the soft, steady kind that speaks of safety and peace. Neighbors stopped by, not with gossip or curiosity, but with warmth, bringing flowers, small notes of congratulations, and shared memories of Dad. The house, once a battlefield of deceit and fear, was now a haven once again. I walked the perimeter one last time, checking each door, each window, not out of fear, but out of ritual. The house was mine, fully, legally, and morally. And the knowledge that it had been defended with patience, strategy, and integrity brought a satisfaction no revenge could ever match. As evening approached, I stood on the porch, the sky painted in hues of gold and violet. Callum's shadow had faded, but the lessons remained. Arrogance, greed, and haste had consequences. Truth, patience, and moral clarity endure. That was the legacy my father left, and now it was my responsibility to uphold. I whispered softly, to Dad, to the house, to the memories that lingered in the corners. "We did it. We preserved what matters. And in doing so, we've honored everything you taught me: integrity, patience, and strength." The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of maple and fresh rain. It felt like approval, a gentle affirmation that the house, the legacy, and the moral victory were complete. The journey had been long, filled with tension, fear, and uncertainty. But now, in this quiet moment, it was done. I went inside, closing the door behind me, and for the first time in months, felt completely at peace. The house, the trust, and our family's story were intact. Callum had learned his lesson, and I had learned mine. True strength is quiet, deliberate, and grounded in integrity. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the hallways, and I finally allowed myself to sit, to breathe, and to absorb the calm. The storm had passed. The house, the maple trees, and the memories they held would endure, a testament to patience, foresight, and the quiet power of doing what is right. And as the night approached, I whispered one last time, not with triumph but with gratitude. We endured. We protected what mattered. And now, this story, our story, has its ending. The maple leaves shimmered in the twilight, the house standing steady, alive with memory, love, and moral victory. And in that moment, I understood fully. The strongest legacy isn't inherited through wealth or walls. It is earned through patience, integrity, and unwavering resolve. The journey had ended. The lesson had been learned. And the house, our home, would stand forever, a quiet monument to what truly matters.